anticipated to be the last portion of today. We're gonna kick that can down the road to December. But I think it'll work out well because it'll give everyone an opportunity to sort of think through all the things we talked about. So I'm a little bit more prepared for that breakout session. And also it allows us to not shortchange some of the other topics like this one, which is that's health equity journey. And so, up until this point, we've sort of done the current state piece for PEBB. We've talked about the intersection between wellness and health equity. Stephen gave the overview of the well-being journey. And now we'll do the health equity journey before we switch over to innovative strategies. So this section will be me and Christy. Christy and I both work on the health equity work group, as well as many staff members and board members in the subcommittee. And then the starting point for this section is really to talk about the retreat that happened 2 years ago. So that was November of 2020. The sort of sole focus of that retreat really was health equity. And so this is an executive summary of that retreat. We'll go through these in a little bit more detail, but the way we set up this section, you might notice a little triangle in the top right. We're going to sort of start with broad concepts and guiding principles, and we're going to narrow down to strategic pillars. We're going to get even more narrow and talk about specific initiatives. And so this is sort of that high level overview. The start of the retreat 2 years ago really was started by reviewing a lot of these health equity guiding principles. So having discussion around more generally PEBB's guiding principles, how OHA defines health equity, that sort of thing. And from there, we moved on and ultimately created this framework, which is the pillars, which folks probably can recall that slide. We typically show it at the beginning of each of the renewal decks. That slide with 5 pillars, actually have here in each slide. That was a really cool thing to come out of the retreat because it really kind of brings organization to the health equity efforts and brings focus so that there are more sort of specific actions that can come out of that framework. Yes, question or comment?
Comment on the strategic pillars.
Yes.
I love this. I love that this work has been done prior to my arrival here. And one of the terms that popped out to me here is health equity lens, and I submit that decision-making should be centered in health equity rather than based on a health equity lens, because the way that this language is evolving and continues to evolve and will continue to evolve. We were talking about health equity lens for the last couple of years and have shifted, at least at OHA, to center health equity rather than looking through something and getting to the answer on the other side of it, which is how I think of the lens. Centering the strategy in health equity doesn't let us get away with a one-stop, like, hey, did we check in on the equity? Oh, good, which the lens language allowed for me in the past. So I submit that for consideration to the group, centering in health equity rather than health equity lens across the board, not just in this document, but across the board.
That suggestion, any
I'm open to that.
And that actually brings up another good point, is that you're right that, the English language is evolving, right? The efforts to include more languages evolving. In fact, we updated one of the headers for the strategic pillars from stakeholders to called it collaborators on it. And here we're calling it key players. So there was a language guide that was released by OHA and OEHS in late 2021. And it did identify stakeholders as so did go ahead and take the liberty of making that update in case you see that and you're like, I don't remember that pillar. That's why we. Obstacles were a part of the discussion 2 years ago. As you can imagine, with a big effort like trying to address inequity, there's going to be obstacles, and so it makes sense to identify and discuss those. Obviously, there are data obstacles, which we are sort of making progress along the data lines. It is sort of slow and arduous type work, as you can imagine, with big data sets, but there are sort of some things happening in that area that we'll talk about. Finite resources from a board staff perspective is another reality. maintaining a diverse board composition, capabilities of vendors, effectively communicating with, specific populations. These are all obstacles which really should be discussed because they lend themselves to law. Solve that. I've got more to say on a couple of them here. And then the ideal future state was really was envisioned and described in the last retreat. And so there was agreement with the State Health and Healthier Together Oregon. The statement there in that sort of dotted box.
I'd like to submit that these things be reviewed on probably an annual basis for updates, given how fast our language is evolving. But that's just something that we ought to do on a regular and routine. I don't see age in there, in terms of discrimination options, and I'm sure there are other.
Definitely some others. And 2 years ago, there were 5 specific populations that were identified as being sort of the focus point. Get there in a few slides, I suppose, but there also was mention of other groups that didn't fall into those 5 that also have been sort of disproportionately impacted by inequities. So I think it makes sense to do that, to revisit that annually, have you some cadence to make sure that they're still as accurate and representative of. And the cool thing about talking about these types of topics is that it really is an evolving space. And so these discussions are going to change as we keep working on this. And so again, this is still that little guiding principle triangle on the top right. This is still sort of broad vision type statements, right? This is a definition from OHA on health equity. You can almost look at it as a goal statement that Oregon, the goal is to have a health system that creates health equity. There was there was discussion in sort of breakout sessions 2 years ago and ultimately agreement with this definition of health equity. This is 2 years old at this point. And so whether or not this needs to be modified, certainly it could. There likely are other factors that could be called out in this description that aren't currently captured here. Okay, we're still staying broad with sort of this guiding principles subsection of this health equity journey. There were some exercises done, and ultimately the board agreed with these 6 assumptions around health equity. I can summarize them quickly. Certain populations have substantial health access to care, social determinants of health, and other health challenges that are typically overlooked, especially if you're looking at aggregate data. These inequities are the result of social and political injustices. Addressing them, these differences are not only unnecessary, but they're unjust and unfair. Number 4 is that for equity to be advanced, it really needs to be pursued as an intentional strategy. There could be some other strategies or initiatives where there's a byproduct of advancing health equity, but to make meaningful strides, it really needs to be considered on its own. It's sort of a big part of the rationale for making it a foundational strategy 2 years ago. Defining health is really a positive state of well-being, not necessarily absence of disease. And the final one is that everyone has a right to a standard of living that's adequate for their. Right, here's our strategic pillars. I also like this document a lot because it helps bring focus. And this is, you'll notice in the top right, we're now a strategic pillar. So we're getting a little bit more narrowed in our focus and how we're talking about this concept. Stakeholders has been updated to key collaborators. There are a lot of different parties in sort of the broader ecosystem that play a part in advancing these goals. Obviously, the board is here, and members are the ultimate sort of goal, right? We're trying to impact member experience. There are a lot of different parties who play a part. The board, of course, broader OHA, elected officials, all of your carrier and vendor partners, the health system, your consulting team, they all play a part, and there are sort of different considerations within each of those collaboration groups. The next column is around decision-making. We do have that health equity lens, which we stated to be centered on health equity. We have some specific initiatives that we'll talk through here in a couple of slides that really kind of bring this to light. The identified populations there are in the center column again. These are from 2 years ago. You see the 5 bulleted there are identified as 30 populations, but the board listed 4 others that also they would like to be sort of a part of the conversation. Health equity metrics. I made a comment around the challenges around data. There are efforts underway around RealD and SOGI data, OHA collecting that data, ask the carriers to collect some of this data. Ultimately, our goal is to get a lot of that data into the data warehouse so that we can incorporate it into any analysis. And so we are sort of actively working. We're trying to understand what are the carrier capabilities around some of these data that they maybe haven't contemplated in the past. For a long time, carriers had a hard time with non-binary gender data. And this is sort of a drum that many of us in this space have sort of been beating a while. It's kind of like turning around in like a ship. So carriers are at different points along their journey in terms of enhancing their functionality. That is something that we're been looking at specific to PEBB's carrier partner. And on the far right, the bridge and long-term strategies. There are certain strategies that can sort of lend themselves to being short-term and achieving short-term achievements, and others are more long-term initiatives. Those 4 that are bulleted there are things that we have talked about one form or another, and for a couple of those we've advanced. You see Centers of Excellence up there. That one's underway. We are going to talk about advocacy a little bit, discussion, or digital health solutions that are in place. So there are certainly lots of other strategies that could be considered and pursued. These were what was included 2 years ago when this framework was drafted and any questions on this or comments? Does it still ring true? And I know it's a lot of text to read through, so I don't know that. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Christy to go through some of these pillars in a little bit more detail.
This is just a little bit deeper dive into these pillars. As Andrew shared, the next one is collaborators that are part of this. Again, the members, really, their voices are at the front of this. We all do have our own role playing. On the next slide,
one thing I just want to make a note on, I know that this is we want to increase engagement with the ERGs, and I understand that's them a little bit, but the one thing that I want to say about that is we need to be really careful that we are putting down people. Because, in the ERGs, folks are clearly in groups marginalized, and we don't want to be taking time asking for the back on their own. What we're asking around them, so anyway. The back, I know that's
as well. For example, communication around new orientation information, awareness of what benefits are. How do we have the opportunity as the board to request that as one of the benefits provided by the employers, the state agencies, that time be protected for for example, an onboarding orientation curriculum where people are walked through, all right, here's your orientation to your benefits. Here are the different sections, financial health, mental health, physical health. Click the stuff you want help with. The next course, the next protected hour of your time, we're gonna walk through how you sign up for and what do the menus of options look like and how you can actually check the boxes to get what you need for your family using these benefits on paid time. Because a lot of the overwork of employees, right? Too many emails, not getting to everything, too many meetings, whatever. They're having to figure out how to prioritize extracting this information from an email inbox that's already overflowing. Personal experience, not knowing what all my pet benefits are.
Great example of work being a determinative.
Yeah, we've actually outreached to DAS, the CHRO, division regarding new employees, and we actually put a proposal together for training curriculum to have it required for every new harassment and other things. And they didn't go that far, but they have really engaged with us on benefits and other kinds of initiatives for and helpful.
It's almost like a grassroots effort from each agency. Like you kind of, I think the struggle is, I work at DAS, full disclosure. But DAS coming down and saying thou shall doesn't help. And other agencies or PEBB even saying thou shall doesn't always help. And so it's almost this like you have to do the communication to the managers and the chief human resource officers of the agencies, as well as like employees need to know about it and kind of start also, you know what I mean? Like I kind of need, which is where the grassroots part of it comes to, make sure that each individual manager recognizes, yes, my employees should get kind of 2 weeks of grounding before, you know, or whatever the right time is for each individual, like onboarding experience to be able to work through those things. Cause I do feel awful being like, here's benefits, figure it out. And it can be somebody from a, you know, pregnant way trying to figure out what they do with what they're going to do for prenatal care to somebody who's just right out of college and like, I don't care about benefits to, you know what I mean? So I feel like having that, I'm always careful about having the mandates from DAS because I feel like it kind of gets hard Heisman, and I don't think that helps.
That's part of the worksite wellness, that Teresa, staff members for 15 largest agencies getting a comprehensive wellness plan specific to their being a big part of that, and I'm sure she's on to comments on typically. Yeah, it's obviously an area we're still pushing.
Is, that's updated, really centering on health equity decisions. And so, had here, you know, seeking input proactively, of inequity, recommendations for, things to look at that could positively impact health equity. And we have developed a tool, have the health equity tool, I'll dive into it, that we, the health equity work group, as we're looking at programs, benefits, things brought to our attention as a group, or even that we as a group have come to realize that there's equity. And then obtaining input from member committee councils, and again from those starting members. I do know that there have been some sessions that have already voices. And through populations that were, that are disproportionately affected by health inequities. Again, this, we have those five, populations, but then also for additional, or, and so how, I think part of this, we're going about, identifying and I think, reporting, and I think that's a really, yes, and so, as Andrew said, really collecting those data fields, and with the carrier, they are each, on their own journey is how they're collecting those data fields and then being them. So having that data be and having programs that are specific, addressing the health, making sure that we have representation from, a very wide diverse population, from member community councils, the representation, maybe bills are in, I know we talked earlier about email access, internet access, at-home mailers, different languages, all different, that learn about benefits and programs. And again, also in the fifth one, loss. So the health equities tool, and so this, tool was developed and it has, different categories, as you can see here, that, are part of the tool. And so at the top level is the organization. So if, and again, the tool is, an evolving, dynamic that we have found as we are applying it, different benefits programs, kind of like helps us peel back the onion and ask even more questions about what it is that we act. And so at the top level is the organization at, for the program, or the benefit, who is the owner of that, and that's providing that, and really finding out more about that organization. For DEI, training in place, what is their local presence in Oregon? First looking high level, and then really getting into equity categories. And so, within those categories, there is, how does it impact the members? Does it improve access to care? Does it improve access to, is it safe? Does it provide value? Then, as I just shared, we at the community asked lots of questions. Languages are available. How does the vendor or the program help that? And so really looking at all of those, and then specifically looking at health inequities and equity. So also in this, at is the program specifically aimed at helping in an area, or is it also with a population that we know has some type of that? Then within the social determinants of health, as far as best practice, for an assessment being done of a member, that resource or that benefit or engaging in that program, are they doing best practice social have a process that's that member with organization, and then is there follow-up to see if that member's need has been met. Then also looking to see, again, is this benefit on helping one of the, with the population that have health and are there any that we need to add and aware whether the offering is evidence-based. This is one that's come up a little bit. We also know that within evidence-based, not equitable, how that we done, and recognizing that language is here, but also census space, what is also. That is kind of also something we brought to the health equity work group to look at, kind of on our to-do list, is to really look at, what is a analogy? How do we broaden that to outcomes measurements, reliable, what kind of data is coming out, how do we know that it's actually. And if there are any other. And then also costs. Have some staff and like,
The tool is really not meant to be like a gate. It's not set up to have minimum requirements that either are met or are not met. Really to sort of vet a policy change, a plan design change, based on health equity, centered on health equity, to really inform you all if you want to approve and implement a given change, a policy change, that sort of thing. At some point in the future, maybe it could have minimum requirements, but it doesn't currently. So I just want to make that comment that this is not a tool that determines green light, red light type of thing. It's really to inform you all so that you're informed. Not deciding not to pursue it.
I'm pretty operational. Is this something that Mercer would fill out, like complete? Okay, so
we're doing it as a group, as far with.
as the committee,
The health equity work group.
okay, so it's not just Mercer on your own, you'll staff it and help it, but you're getting the input of the committee.
I feel like before it comes to the. Yeah, exactly. Bring it to the committee.
But it's I think one of the things that I've learned, and I'm trying to keep learning, is we all use our tools that we have, but unless we vet them and talk to others that are in this world or experiencing this, then we're not getting to, and we need to build it. So I just wanted to make sure that we're hearing the actual input of members. So Dawn, sorry.
To build on that, the lived experience of the people who are completing analysis. I see that showing up in a couple different ways throughout. That is to say, who's answering these questions about the given item that is being analyzed, be it a program or a policy. That the lived experience, I don't see represented in that way, and that's on me and on us too, right? We need to make sure that we are at tables with people who can tell us actually the answers to the questions that we want answered, and not asking myself whether needs are going to be met by a tool that's not designed to fulfill a need for me. That's one of the things that I just wanted to build on. And so the way that I would see that manifesting here is potentially, how did this program, how does this vendor, how does this policy incorporate what could be member voice, what could be the voice of community, what could be the voice of people with the lived experience that they're trying to reach, whoever that prioritized population is. How do they incorporate, how does the vendor incorporate the voice of their target population into ongoing QI as they are developing their own interventions that they're trying to sell to us? That's one question that I would like to ask. And the other question is, sorry, if anybody had responses to that.
Barriers that
So that's one of the things. And the other is around the evidence. As a doc, I'm a family doc, and I was raised on the holy grail of evidence-based decision-making in the early 2000s. And it's only in the last about 5 years that it has come to my attention how profoundly flawed our scientific body of evidence and literature is because of the people who look like me who have done most of that science, and because of the subjects and participants in the studies, how they may have been recruited, whether or not they had say in how that happened, et cetera, et cetera. So that box is of great interest to me, and the observation that I'd like to offer is that there is a huge amount of attention on this problem right now across the country at the federal level and also at the state level, where our very own Health Evidence Review Commission, HERC, is undertaking an equity-based evaluation of their processes over the course of the next probably year or two. So I would encourage you to tune into that as it happens, because they will likely be developing principles and values along the lines of the things that we wanna align ourselves with. We may wind up ahead of them if we're able to tune into the national conversation, or they've had a chance to grind through the work at the level with all the partners.
Yeah, thank you for coming. To try to understand where they're at with that evaluation. If we put like.
Yeah, they're not there yet. They're just getting started right now.
Okay.
So it's gonna be a minute.
Generally, what I took away from comments on, I really appreciate the fact that there are all inherent biases in the tools that we develop, inherent bias, applying that tool, to recognize them, check ourselves. Happens in the AI world all the time, right? People who develop the algorithms are infusing that into the same things true with any tool that man can.
And as I look around this room, I see a representation, what might look quite a lot like Oregon as a whole, but may not actually represent lived experience of the communities disproportionately impacted by those systemic inequities in a way that we want those voices in. And I know that we have said that on a variety of occasions to improve that with our here too, that'll help us. I appreciate that.
So I have two things, Becky, for those on the phone. Under additional considerations, under implementation, I would love to see some detail on how often, the frequency of how we're gonna check the success of this tool. So I would hate for us to say, we will revisit it every 2 years. So like, is there like, thinking like a stage gate process for IT projects, which was more of like, okay, 6 months down the line, how are we doing? What are the members saying? So like, do an incremental approach of improvement versus, hey, here's the big shebang. Whether or not we like it, we'll find out in 2 years. I would hate for that to be the process, and would love to put that as part of the implementation so that members know, yes, this is a new thing, but we are committed to improving it and would like for you to be part of the process. So that was kind of request one. And then my other request was for actually slide 45. The list of populations, it's thorough, but it took me a while to figure out what was missing. And I feel like if there's an opportunity to add non-English speaking as a priority population, is that will be critical in terms of literacy, types of communication. It's not just the medium, it's like, how are we writing things? And reading, it's a fifth or sixth grade reading level. Is it transcreated versus translated? Because we know written translation is very different from spoken translation. So things like that, it's enough that I do feel like I'd love for all of us to consider priority.
That's a clarifying question. Sure. So that on the implementation piece, are you referring to the implementation of a given change or so like as a new plan is rolled out? You're referring to the tool itself.
For now, the tool itself.
The tool itself, okay,
Yes.
got it, okay.
And at some point, as we mature throughout the process of getting member input, maybe we bring
Yeah.
operational.
Just thinking about, data, what you, but thinking about our member, does DAS have information about, state employees and their family? Or have limited,
Languages they would need.
what languages they would need state
Yeah.
employees?
I have no idea if that's collected anywhere from a DAS perspective. I worry, especially on a family perspective, PEBB is really the only one that would collect family thing. It's not like DAS in an employer perspective.
Yeah, that's a good point, I see. Well, what about just the, know that? Like we would have to know.
Anecdotal, so data is as good as the data that's put in to systems, as we all around this table know. So from the Workday data, I think there's inconsistencies on how it's been reported on by agency. And so, but I don't know of us capturing a language, and I will say, first off, I don't know of Workday in a different language. So I don't know how to do that. I mean, there's probably a problem there.
The only place I can think of that we would maybe collect it in Workday is if the employees collecting a language differential. And they would have to specify which language they are getting. But that's, of course, only if your job requires you to speak a different language. But even if your job doesn't require it, and you speak it, and you don't name the differential, it's not necessarily.
Hey,
Ed would be the only one, especially with families, to be in a position to ask such.
Carriers now?
Yeah, the carriers routinely
should,
collect
right?
that because they have to offer the language, either translation service or something at point of service.
Okay.
Carriers
Optional
do
field.
that.
Mandatory, doesn't matter, they collect.
Okay, well, maybe it's worth just taking a look at what we. Cause I don't know what it is. Among our members, what's top 10 languages spoken or, and then what's the, like, how many?
I know, I can get the top 10 languages, but currently I think we align with what the, and all different. Spanish is definitely one, and there, I want to. Mandarin, yeah, but for our communications, at least, I will align with.
Do we have like a size? Or anything like that? We just know that they're top 10, but we don't know.
I not off the top.
Well, no, not off the top of your head, but I'm just saying,
I think we can.
can we go deep, do we actually get that?
It would be tough with PEB membership because we don't ask.
Developing a new
Yes.
it'll be a lot.
It will, to the extent that people have that information,
Right.
it will be optional.
Well, it just feels like worth knowing, because we could have a community example that's of some size, let's say. And the most effective way to reach individuals in that case might be actually be a direct communication from an because that's just than trying, but it's faster, better, and easier. And trying to elaborate system or whatever, but it actually get direct on. Or maybe different population, much larger. People, or, 5,000 people, that means a different. But we should give them help, like, don't understand. For different language. Anyway, it's a good question. Probably good.
We have some examples, that have been put through the tool or are currently going through the tool. Slide. Assessments.
So, one of the other initiatives was a benefit vendor assessment. This just provides you with an executive summary. And so, this isn't a one-time process, obviously. This is, ongoing assessments of the vendors. And you'll just see here that basically what their strengths are. Overall, the vendors do have a strong organizational commitment to DEI. They did share, I think, in one of our meetings about, where they are with data collection. And it's fairly voluntary, but they do have data collection with the members and then also with providers. And again, trying to meet that concordance between provider and patient. And then again, most of them do have accommodations for loss, hearing loss. They have initiatives there with us on network. Some of them do have that benefit language guidelines. Also having specialized services for population. And then also web content accessibility guidelines. Some they have partial or full WCA. So that was their strengths. And then on the next slide is just some of the areas of opportunity that these assessments came up with. So, in this area, again, it is, just improving upon the collection of demographics and really it's also, it comes down to data too, is collecting the data, but then also being on it and so that those, inequities brought to the surface, so we are aware of them. It'll help. The CDC did recommend, to have that universal all patients. And then the screening for social determinants of health is another area that it's like, it's whether it's a checkbox or there's actually a process in a world community-based organization, follow up, actually getting connected to the services. So opportunity. Well, and so I'll jump down to, the last thing I'll just say here too is person-centered. That is also just that helps in that and having that patient model. So that shared decision making and each active that conversation.
So, I'd be interested in the other, board members' thoughts, but just, I feel like we have a kind of guilty situation. On the one hand, I feel like Pfizer is way ahead of the other carriers area. Whenever we get updates on them relatively regularly, it's sort of like Pfizer gets this presentation. And then you get to the, Moda and Providence and so I just want to put that out there that I don't think that the other two carriers I wouldn't describe them as being organizational. I hear a lot of excuses and it's the same excuse I've heard now for some years. Moda has a pathetic provider network response rate. their demographics, and I don't see they have a good. And I don't see that Providence is doing a whole lot better as far as their long-term plans on their provider networks and access. So I'm just putting that out there that like, that's how I react to every one of those. Nice, kind of, you got neighboring country. And then I'm just like, turn the camera. Like, I don't know how we address that or get them on the path, but I don't feel like it's the right path. I'm not impressed with their current commitment. And I just hear more excuses.
So you may have already thought of this, but I don't see it here, so just tell me next time we'll talk about it. For the commercial, because they're commercial carriers, have you heard of the NCQA's health accreditation, health equity accreditation plus options? I don't know if I think that's an opportunity. I'm personally thinking about it for the marketplace. That's much longer road for us, for sure. But if we can, if that's something that we can require carriers to some degree, I think that will help with a lot of the heavy lifting that we would need to do as a PEBB or state agency. Just something to consider. I don't know the price. I don't know all the other than other states have already started thinking about it. I know California's all over that. DC's done that as well. It's fairly new, last 2 years, but it's definitely getting.
Is that focused on the delivery system or on the insurer?
I think it started with the insurer, and I think they're moving towards delivery. They're starting to introduce a little bit by little bit.
We should talk about the RFP as a potential long-term strategy. There's a lot of conversation to be had around requirements that we're putting into that. Lines, whether it's accreditation or some other terms. I definitely think there's something that, and RFP isn't really a long. Just a year, as you said, so it's not like a next year. Presents an opportunity, in a lot of this process signals to the carriers this is important to PEBB. There are regular check-ins with them and sort of improvement plans that we expect them to present back to us on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. Is that effective in really changing their internal additional values around DEI? Maybe.
I think it's effective. I think, Bird should get a lot of credit actually for one carriers along. I just kind of animal, but yeah, I mean, everybody knows carriers aren't a lot of these steps. Yeah, there's,
one of the cool things about the influence that PEBB wields, right? I mean, one of the biggest buyers in the entire state, the carriers are going to listen if you say this is important to us. Actually get them to make progress on these things. You're benefiting your own members, but you're also just benefiting everyone.
So I really like what Jimmy said about getting this accreditation or whatever it is. If we let carriers know that we are looking at that help say, hey, this is, what we're maybe looking for as we do contracts, things like that, that at least get it out there to them that,
Instead of when they come in with something, go, oh, and by the way, we need this.
Right.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
Yep.
I wonder what the runway would be. Because the accreditation process is that a year.
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
That's the thing. Say we want it, and they can't get accreditation for 2 years, and we're.
Yeah. Kind of like the CDC recognition for the diabetes prevention program. Yeah, just like that, It's a while.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I really appreciate it. And I'm kind of shaking up because we've been signaling for a while now. This is really important. And they seem, in my opinion, like, oh, cool. This is not, it's like lip service and it's like, you said we're going to let it go or it's a fad or something. Or, So maybe maybe it's because we're not measuring it in some way, or they don't have money tied to it. But,
There's a lot of departments by OHA that here by a certain year, and
yeah,
they are making progress towards that, but, you know, we get the but there are a lot of requirements that we're.
I just want to bring up because we only have 10 more minutes. I know we have to leave at 5. And we're going to move one of the discussions to the December meeting. I'm curious if, folks would be, some person could have more of a discussion or what would have to shift to do that. You know, if we go back to the format of we're all virtual, it's harder to have discussion, particularly like our room teams, and we would have the care. Have flexibility. Want to do that.
Someone remind me, please, is it,
When is it?
Sure.
we have to ask.
And we could, yeah, but we can, I feel like we shouldn't let, I mean, our boardroom isn't huge, but we have a room in Salem that can work.
Y'all come to Oregon Tech, Wilsonville.
I know.
Oh, yeah. You're supposed to take what you need, well,
Yeah, that's right, and that's a really big office too. I don't think the space should be a barrier. Probably can't. Just like to know, like, would you all be able to get funding in person?
I'd be most worried about Greg, so Greg can do that.
Don't worry about me. I'm absolutely fine. I have done this for travel to Salem several times a month for a year.
You finish December?
December, January.
We can call survey after.
Okay.
I have no idea if I'll be able to. So my vote doesn't count. If I did just attend, I don't know if I'd be.
Number 20th is our meeting.
Tuesday, December 20th.
Late. It's the week that lots of folks travel to. Not the best. So survey sounds like a good idea.
Well, it was nice to meet you all in person. And see you somehow in the next month or two.
Thank you.
So we still have a few more.
Yeah. Sneak out. And do
Yes,
NCQ, right?
National Council, Quality Assurance. National Center. They can use it for so many things. Not just-
You guys, yeah.
Providing insurance. They can do it as a.
Yeah, you can, but
good.
We're going to
National
do like
Committee
a,
for
we got 10 minutes, we're gonna do like a recap discussion and
I think it would be helpful to talk to you about what have we not done today that we would be getting into. And because I am really interested. Us to be able to have the time to discuss those. Going into the next word. Yeah,
now.
because the spring will all be about hearing from carriers and what the.
yeah.
And the carriers, additionally, like, if you allow them, they'll drive the conversation, once you have a plan. And so that's the benefit of the board having, these pre-discussions where it's like, we're telling them where we want to go. And of course, we'll hear suggestions, but if you just kind of passively wait for them to come up with, they're gonna have, they'll fill the room with their ideas rather than ours. So that's the benefit of having some time to chew on things together before we get.
I think a benefit of this until December is we have the OS retreat Not that really want to know what to do, but I think there is a possibility. You know, where they're going.
Good, so yeah, and, as it relates to the content we didn't get to, innovative strategy section really is focused on well-being and health equity. Now through the renewal cycle, there's going to be others of the sort of more tactical stuff that we'd be looking at, including potentially some carrier suggestions based on what they're seeing. But as it relates to these specific strategies, they're largely centered on health equity and well-being. Some of them are more short-term in nature. For example, looking at coverage of Google, something that we can look at in the renewal cycle coming up. Some of them are more long-term if you wanted to, consider a front door model where you're using an advocacy vendor that really is the sort of front door for all your needs. That would require a lot of discussion. That's more of like something that we work through the RFP. So we also have a section in here on the tools that are available to you. You can read through that. The renewals coming up, that's a big opportunity to make sort of more short-term changes. Procurements are much more long-term timeframes. You have a draft timeline in here, which shows 24 months. For a medical and pharmacy RFP, but this really is sort of illustrative because there's so many variables that could change the timing of this that sort of something to noodle and to think about, but it could certainly be longer than that. Got a couple of slides on RFP consideration. And then this final section is really where we can do the breakout session. Key assumptions to achieving PEBB goals, sort of a refresher on working PEBB vision. So that slide might be changing now that there's a new. There are some sort of historical accomplishments. This is not an exhaustive list, but the idea here. Yeah, so starting on slide 81, just to sort of get the creative juices flowing to think through, some of the accomplishments from the past 2-3 years, and then we would shift and have our breakout session. Have folks think about what strategies and values want to be prioritized in the next. So a lot of this content would sort of be good reading material in advance of December's breakout session, which is make it that much more valuable. And, we've included some ideas, examples to think about based on the triple aim of access, improve quality, improve member experience, more efficient delivery from a cost perspective. But these are really just examples that we can potentially discuss under each of those three. Sorry for speaking so quickly there at the end, but that is the remaining content. That leaves us with 2.5 minutes to spare.
Why you meant.
More break slides.
Yeah, good too.
Aaron, we didn't get to do a lot of your work on
That's
items,
okay.
but it was really good.
Like seeing all the work.
Yeah. Fun fact.
What's the pink thing at the end?
That's my daughter's Chelsea camper from Barbie, but it's just about camping being such a beloved pastime here in Oregon, and so wanting to know, camping stories for them.
I was like, how does Barbie fit in?
Yeah, that's Barbie. I have young kids at home. I was actually able to procure like 3/4 of that for around the house. So.
Really appreciate everyone. Figure.
It's a ton of information. I mean, yeah, so we'll map December for sure. And You know, it'll actually be perfect.
Thank you all for participating. So that's what we're,
That's why it took some,
which is great. Yes.
Thank you for my first meeting. This is the standard, I'm like, I'm in. Now it's completely like 14 weeks and 24 hours.
It could be 8 years later, it's like.
Officially adjourned, I guess. Oh, do I need to make space for public comment? Any public comment?
Yes, you do.
Any public comment?
Nope.
No public comment on official. Everyone.
To the host and Mercer.
And,
Yep.
I feel